class. This is a video about how to prepare the final stage of your MAT final project. There's two parts. The first part is about laying out your score in calligraphy. The second part is about sequencing and recording audio. Okay, part one. The first thing to do, if you haven't already done it, you probably have if you're watching this video, but is go to the assignment and download the template and the score layout component checklist if you don't already have those handy. I already emailed them to you, but there they are, is also there. The component checklist you use to check that you've entered everything necessary into the score. Template does some of the work for you because it has bar lines in there, but you need to put in a lot of extra material as well as your notes to make it a final score. So you use this to check that you've got everything in there. Some of them are self-explanatory. Your name every page, title every page, tempo marking, quarter note equals 100 or whatever your tempo is. File marking, rock, whatever it is. Clef signs on every staff. So I'm using a finale file as an example because I'm using a computer right now, but obviously yours will be a handwritten score. So you see clef signs every stave, key signatures every stave, time signature at the beginning of the piece. If you change time signature, you would have to put in the different time signature, but you shouldn't be changing time signature in this project. Chord symbols over the beat in which they occur. That relates thing right here is incredibly important. Alignment and spacing. That means that you need to have your score laid out so that every beat and every part of every beat is completely lined up on every single stave. So if you had a 16th note right here in the bass, the last 16th note of beat 4, well, that's got to line up with the last 16th beat 4 on the drums. And if there was one in the melody, that would all have to line up all the way along. So the way to achieve that is to lay out your drums first. Put in your drum grooves first because they're all about spacing. And since you're going to be using 16th notes on at least one of your grooves, do that, and then that just basically sets up your grid for your whole measure. If it's 8th notes, then it sets up an 8th note grid. So then as you're writing things out in each part, you just make, if you got your drums well written, then you just line everything up with them and you should be okay. So if your alignment is off, you will lose quite a few calligraphy points because that does make your score unreadable in a live situation. Section letters, that's A section, B section, okay. That would be like, now I'm doing this in finale, but write that in a box. Put it right over the beginning bar line. And then when you get to your B section, you put in your B section letter. Now a reminder about the length of the project. You are going to record 32 measures of music plus 1 or 2 measures for an ending. That's what you're going to record. But what you're going to write out is only 16 measures plus your ending because I'm not requiring that you write out your variations. So what you do is you write out your initial groove and melody, A section, initial groove and melody, B section for your second page, and then your ending. Then what you record is your initial A, your initial B. Then you record also another A and another B with some kind of slight variation in it, an extra track added, maybe a little variation in the groove or whatever, or maybe an improvised solo or something else. You don't have to write out that variation. You just record it as an audio thing. Okay, getting down here, double bar lines between sections, that's important. So when you get to the end of your A section, you're going to need to put a double bar line right here. Just this kind of double bar line. That's between sections. Then at the end of the piece, you put a final bar line, and you should know what that is by now. Now, repeat signs. Okay, so this is important. So if you've got your drum groove, you've got it all figured out, and you know it's going to last for the remainder of the 4 measures on this line, you have a couple of options. You can do 1 bar repeats, okay, and you could just do a series of those. Or what I think is probably preferable, most drummers would prefer, is to just use slashes. So this is like, continue simile. It would look like that. So you would just write continue, or abbreviation cont simile, C-O-N-T period simile. It means continues in a similar way. What you're doing then is you're giving the drummer freedom to vary things a little bit, but stay with this essential idea. That's a very practical and realistic way to write a drum part. Now, if something changed and you had a special kick or some special new different thing, say over here, you would have to write out that measure. But as long as things are staying the same, you can use slashes or repeats. Now, when you get to the next system, see, these are called systems. That's a system. Okay. You get to the next system, now you need to write out the drum groove again, even if it's the same. You have to write it out again there. But once you've written it out, if it's remaining constant, again, you can just do slashes after that. Okay, that's a labor-saving device. With the bass line, you're probably not going to be able to use repeats too much with your other parts of your score, because you're not going to be having that much repeating, literally exact repeats. Operating chord symbols must be lined up where they occur, over beat 1 or whatever beat they occur on, and should be spatially aligned with the rest of the music. So if you do have something like a chord attacking on the and of 2 or something, it's got to be written over the and of 2. Make sure your stem direction is right according to guidelines. Make sure your bass is written in the range of the 4-string bass, no lower, and don't go any higher than, say, a high G, and I wouldn't even go that high. I'd say maybe not go any higher than, say, an E above the staff. And drums and cymbals, make sure they're all written on the correct lines and spaces. And that's your score layout checklist. Score layout checklist and the template are both currently uploaded under this assignment on Berklee OL. So you can download them there if you find that you've lost them or you don't have them. And this is also the place where you're going to upload your final score and audio. Now, ideally you would give me the score in class, but if something goes wrong and it's not ready, then you have until 11:30 that night to upload it, in which case you would need to upload a very, very readable scan of it. And I caution you here, don't just send a really darkened photo or something, because if I can't read something, that's the final deadline, and I'm gonna mark it as, lacking in terms of readability, and that's gonna lower your grade a great deal. So it's your responsibility. If you're uploading a scan of your score, it's got to be super readable and very clear. Do the video where we're going to talk about sequencing. So before you, what I'm going to tell you how to do is how to export your MIDI information from your finale file into a sequencer, so that you don't have to input all those notes from scratch into a sequencer. Now, if you want to do it that way, inputting the notes from scratch, and you have a method for that, you prefer to do it that way, that's fine. But this is a labor-saving thing, and then you can do various things to make it sound a little bit more musical and human. So, but the first thing to be aware of is, if you have input all this information and you have input 2 A sections and 2 B sections of music, and you have your variations already input into finale, then you want to input the entire file. You want to export the entire file. But if you're planning to do your variation on your A section and your variation on your B section by just adding them in to, say, GarageBand later, because you don't have to write them out, then you don't need to export 32 measures of music. Or get rid of all the remaining measures that are not required to be written out. So in that case, I would select from the beginning of the section to the end of the section, and I would just hit delete, and I would get rid of those measures, and then I would only end up exporting 16 measures, the A and B. So it's up to you. If you put your variations into the A2 and B2, then you should export those. If you haven't, then there's no need to export them. Okay, now let's go through the process. So first thing is to do a save as. So you go to File, do Save As, and save it to my desktop. And then I am going, this is the important thing, the format. I'm going to save it not as a finale notation file, but as a standard MIDI file. Okay, say save. And then this should be pre-selected, but this is very important. You want to go with format 1, which is all instruments saved to separate tracks, because you want to have control over those tracks. And then say OK. And now it'll be on my desktop. Desktop, you'll notice that it has the suffix of MID. That's a MIDI file. I'm demonstrating this with GarageBand. Make sure you save the file in a way that you could find it if you had to search for it. And I would name this MAT Final Project, and then your name. New file open. There's my name. It came up with a guitar track because that's the template I chose. You can name tracks. So I click on this name, and I'm going to change it to Guitar 1. Okay, now what we do is it's very intuitive, you just simply grab your MIDI, and I'm going to drag it in to the GarageBand file. Here it goes. And what it does is it just finds all the tracks, and it knows what instruments they are, and it just puts them in there. But there is a little bit more work to be done. Obvious if you play the track right without doing any extra work on it. Check it out. So that obviously doesn't sound like what we wrote. So first thing is the drum track, which you can see here is labeled drums, came in as a piano track. So all that drum MIDI information is triggering a piano. So we don't want that. So the first thing you do is change this track to a drum track. You do that by coming over here and choosing drums, choosing a drum kit. There it is, and I will solo this track so that you can now hear that it sounds like drums. The bass. Now the bass came in as a muted electric bass. If you like that sound for your project, go ahead and keep that. If you want a different sounding bass, you might want to go with something like the upright. I do not want you to use deep round synth bass or sub-synth bass or tight synth bass. I don't want you to use those because those are going to make it hard to perceive the bass pitches in some cases. So use a more conventional bass sound. But that's actually below the range of the bass, and I'll show you how this works. In MIDI, all the numbers are one lower than on piano. We click on this edit window here, and you'll see it lines up with the MIDI numbers. And the lowest sounding pitch on bass should be, in MIDI language, should be E1, and you can see that's E1. And you can see there's notes below E1 way down here. So we got to get all these notes up an octave. What you do is you just click and drag over at least one of them. Then you do Command A to select them all, and then you take this pitch slider and just move it up 12 half steps. It's got to be exactly 12, otherwise it'll be out of tune. And now it'll be in the right octave. Okay, now we're in the right octave. Okay, now you've fixed your bass, you've fixed your drums. Now you can decide what you want to do for sound for your chords and the sound for your melody. Maybe you're going to double the melody with your voice, or you're going to play the melody with your guitar and you're going to get rid of that track, or maybe you're going to add an extra chordal track with guitar, or add a pad, background pad, or maybe play real piano performance into the track or something like that. That's all good. Just make sure that the basic information is still audible. That is the melody, either performed live or from your MIDI. Clear representation of your voice-led chords, even if you put extra chordal track on top of that, your drums and your bass. Okay, for example, let's listen to this for a minute. Now obviously it needs to be mixed, and this is actually your melody track. So you might want to label it melody. And then here is currently represented by piano. Well, maybe you decide that you would like to have the piano, but you'd also like to have an extra sort of like sound of, say, strings or something. Well, then you could simply duplicate this track by doing Command D, Option drag, Option, click and drag. Now all that MIDI information has been duplicated. Now change the instrument to something like, I don't really have much loaded here, so it's not very interesting. But if you have some strings or whatever, you could do that. But I'll do a pad. So you're using synth because, again, we don't want anything to overwhelm the music with effects and stuff so that we can't hear the bass. I've chosen Cosmic Reflection here. I'm going to mix it down a little bit, and in order to allow myself to do that, I have to click on that. And you can hear it's the same chordal information as this, but now we've got this other texture. And then if you're a piano player, maybe you could play live piano now on top of that. And now you have your basic chords represented here, and you could replace this with some more interesting thing. Or you may decide to keep both of those and add like a funky guitar track or something. Okay, so that's a way in which you can add some interesting effects or interesting extra musical stuff that you don't have to write out. And that's it.